okay, so what's the missing piece in terms of what will help people to regulate? And really what we struggled with was a lot of it had to do with motivation. Like you have to want to regulate. You have to want to be the best parent or the best husband or the best professor or whatever the relationship is. And so that's where that 4-step process really came about, which Robin described. The first step is really knowing your triggers. And some of them are like more complicated, right, than others, right? Like whether it be around, like I was joking in like with my partner, the trigger is like stupid things like expensive almond milk or cashew milk. It's like, really? I mean, it's all like from my childhood, like that's a ripoff. And it just can totally piss me off, like boom, from 0 to 100. How about, what are some of your triggers, Robin?
Well, I actually was going to talk about the triggers that I have as a mom because I know that people who are listening, especially if their parents will relate to this, but even if they're not, just um, when my kids would do something that would scare me, like be very independent. And my favorite example of the meta moment was when my daughter came to me and said, Mom, I want to spend my junior year of college abroad. And I was prepared for it. So I knew it was coming. And I knew I would have to manage my emotions. But then when she told me that she wanted to study in Egypt, then I realized that that was halfway around the world. And I wasn't going to see her for a whole year, and I didn't know who she'd be staying with. Everything inside of me wanted to say, you're not going, forget it, you're not going. But instead, and I think you'll relate to this part of it, I thought, how do I want my daughter to walk away from this interaction? What is my best self right now as a mom? I wanted my daughter to see me as a mom who supported her dreams. And I knew that if I just said, forget it, that would never happen. So I couldn't quite get excited and ask her all the details and buy her plane ticket in that moment, but I could then say, tell me more about that. So that I could be that mom I wanted to be. And I would know that when she looked back at that moment, she would see my mom supported my dreams. Of course, it's now 10, 13 years later, and she looks back at that moment and she says, you know what? I know you were freaking out and I know you wanted to tell me not to go, but I know you really tried to support me. And thank you. Example.
Thank you, Robin, for that. So the first step, right, was you were triggered, you were activated, and then you kind of take the step back, you pinch yourself, don't say it, don't say your true feelings, it's okay, you want to be, and you took a nice long breath, and then you go to step 3, which is that best self. And just to unpack that for all of you, is the best self we see as comprised of 2 kind of core aspects of your authentic best self. The first is your personal ideal. Like for Robin, it would be the mom that you yourself want to be. And then there's the mom who you want your kid to see.
That's right.
And so oftentimes there's overlap between those adjectives or descriptors, but not always. And so I always think about it as a director, like my core best self is compassionate, empathic, but I realize that people need to see me as being fair, right, in the workplace. And so fairness isn't like my core thing that I think about all the time, but yet I want to make sure that I'm seen and talked about and experienced as fair. And I'm sure for parents too, fairness is a big one, because if you have multiple kids, right, there's a lot of jealousy and envy, that might come about when kids are perceiving you as giving attention or a little bit more affection to one child over the other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to add to what you're saying, I know as a mom, I've always wanted to be loving and supportive and patient. And I want my kids to see me as loving, and I want them to see me as strict too. I want them to see me as that mom who will set limits,
Hmm.
because I want them to feel both held by those limits and also then ultimately be able to set limits for themselves. But it's not exactly the most popular thing in the world to be a mom who's strict sometimes when you're growing up, from the perspective of a kid. But at the same time, it is what I wanted my kids to see. And
You want my feedback on how successful you were with that?
sure, anytime you want to give it to me again and again.
So let's just be clear about the meta moment, right? The mood meter is our tool, right, for just general emotional self-awareness, right? It's just helping you. You wake up in the morning, you're in the yellow, the green, the blue, the red. You are going through the day, and you hear news, and it puts you to the blue, or you get some interesting feedback, and it puts you into the red, or not the red or the green, whatever it might be. That's everyday kind of emotional lives. The meta moment is really used to help you kind of with those moments, right? When someone, you know, my example, was with my dad, as a son, where my father was easily triggered by me, because I lived a life that was very different from his life. My father grew up very poor. Um, he had a tough childhood, and then he had a son who became a professor and had a different lifestyle, and so he would be sometimes envious, of what I had. Um, and at family gatherings, he would say some things that were mean or cruel to me, about the way I lived my life. And I could easily, you know, I was brought up, go for the jugular, because I witnessed going for the jugular. And so the question is, right, so you pause, you take that breath, and you're like, all right, Mark, remember, you're the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. And it's funny because for that best self piece that Robin and I talk about, some people like to use words like compassionate, caring, loving. Some people like to use adjectives. I mean, not adjectives, they like to use images. One of our friends who lives in New York City said, when he looks at the Statue of Liberty on his commute home, he sees that as like an image of his best self. And then, for me, it has been, you know, um, like different things that have happened across my career. Like, all right, Mark, remember, you're the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. My favorite one, as you know, Robin, I think, was when I went to visit a school, and this little 5-year-old was the most adorable thing in the whole world. And I never visited this class before, and she was so excited to meet me, and she dragged me over to the mood meter, and she started shaking. She was so excited, and I said, "Why are you shaking so much?" And she said, "Because the mood meter man is here." And so, like, for a couple months, I was like, "All right, Mark, you're the mood meter man." And so when anybody would activate me, I'm like, how would the mood meter man respond? So encouraging all of you, right, to think about like what works best for you to be your best self. So let's just take a moment and allow people to just process that. How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be experienced? How do you want to be talked about?
What's your personal ideal?
Mark and Robin, while we're on the topic, there's a question here I think is kind of interesting. Someone asked, how does the meta moment work in a fast situation? Like a toddler in a parking lot or something not dangerous, but where not reacting will be seen as permission by the toddler.
It's a great question. So, right, in a dangerous situation, right, you go into fight survival mode. You don't think about it. You just that's during a fire drill. You're not like, oh, I have to think about my best self.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a time where whatever it is that comes to your mind that gets the child out of danger, you do that. But the other thing about the meta moment that it does bring up, it's really important, and thank you, Ryan, for asking that question from the audience. Being your best self doesn't mean being nice and touchy-feely all the time. Sometimes it means being strict. Sometimes it means saying no. So if somebody's trying to take advantage of you, if you feel that you've been really overtaken by somebody else's big personality for a long time and you want to set a limit, saying no may be your best self.
Yeah, and we always say that sometimes being your best self is being assertive,
That's right.
right? You have to let, like in a bullying situation or where someone has a lot of power over you, right? The goal is not to be kind and compassionate necessarily, but to say, wait a minute, like this is not working.
That's
Your
right.
best self stands up for yourself.
Right. And as somebody's saying, using the word boundaries, your best self sets boundaries. And the other thing that I love about this concept is that your best self is sometimes breaking the boundaries that you built for yourself. So in a fight, for example, if I fight with my husband, I just got married in March, we're living in quarantine for our honeymoon, so it's pretty intense. And there are times that we fight, even though we just got married, are very happy, and we're newlyweds. It's 24/7. It's been pretty interesting honeymoon. And thank you, congratulations.
Do you want to talk more about that, Robin?
What?
So do you want to talk more about that?
Not right now, maybe later. So sometimes if we're fighting, and I just want to withdraw because I'm really irritated or I've had enough, my best self will kick in. And what I say to myself, okay, I'm a doctor of feelings, right? I'm a doctor of feelings. I need to push myself beyond my boundary to be the first one, to be the first one to be vulnerable, to be the first one to repair. And that's pretty significant when you have to push yourself to do something that may be a little bit uncomfortable, but you're doing it with an image of your best self, all in that very short space of time, stretching out those seconds to be minutes and going in with an image or a word that will remind you to be the self you want to be.
Thank you. So that's our meta moment. And again, just to review the process, you're activated, whether it be from a parent, from a child, from a colleague, from a person in the street, it could be anywhere. You pause, you take that breath, you activate your best self. And then through the lens of your best self, you both strategize and act. Because in the end, right, it does result typically in a behavior, unless it's just you're alone. But it will end up typically in a behavior. And I would say that, I've applied to the meta moment when I was on the road. Now I'm on the Zoom, but I used to be on the road a lot doing presentations. And when you're out as a public presenter, people, oh, can we go out for dinner? And I was like, oh my God, I go out for dinner. I don't want to go out for dinner. And then people expect you to have to communicate and talk at dinner. And I'm like, I'm really an introvert that doesn't really like people that much. Do I really have to do this? And so I had like a zillion meta moments throughout the night. But I share this because where the meta moment came in very helpful for me was in like not using food as a regulation strategy. And what I mean by that is my anxiety oftentimes would make me eat a lot at meals just to like deal with my anxiety around being on. And when I would get in the elevator or walk down the stairs of my hotel, I would say things like, all right, Mark, right, how do you want to feel when you come back to your room in 4 hours from now? And what does your best self look like at that dinner? And it would literally, prime me to, when I go to eat the extra chip or eat the extra thing, it would just remind me like your best self is going to be really comfortable back in your hotel room, not sitting there thinking, oh my God, I ate so much and you're so bloated and whatever. So many applications. Let's pause for a minute, Robin, and just take any questions that people might have.
Sure.
Somebody knows that, yes, I remember that night actually being stuck in Newark when I was supposed to go to that conference. Let me tell you, my positive self-talk was on hold that night.
I have a question that maybe people would like to respond to. So somebody's asking about the fourth step, which is about strategizing and acting. As Mark said, taking a meta moment results in a behavior typically. And so I wonder if you could think about for a moment, what would change in your life if you activated your best self the next time you get into a tangle, the next time somebody triggers you, the next time you feel like you're walking into that room and you're already heated. What would change in your life? I would be victorious,
Mhm.
less stress. Yeah.
Lots of great responses.
People feeling more peaceful, more in control of yourself.
Wonderful. So Robin, let's make the transition to the parenting work very quickly.
Sure.
So I just want to spend a few minutes on that tonight, talking about like the course that we built. So Robin and other colleagues of ours we created a course that is available for free for all teachers and educators in the state of Connecticut on in many ways how to be your best self as an educator during these challenging times. We have 27,000 teachers who've registered for that course, which is pretty freaking incredible. And soon we're going to make that course available for the entire United States. We have like the 5-step process, right? Can we just take people through, like, as a parent, like what's the first step?
First step 4.
Or just, you know, your kid, like I'm your kid, I'm like, I hate you. I'm never going to school again. Go blank yourself, mommy. You're a blank. And you're like you've taken 16 meta moments, right? So
So you should be used to it already. So you
Yeah.
wanted to, so you have to check in with yourself. As the parent, if I'm looking at the face I was just looking at right now, I need to check in with myself, because no matter what's going to come next, it's not going to be under my control if I don't manage my emotions first. So the first step is I'm going to check in with myself and bring myself to a place where I can have a calm conversation, or where I can do some co-regulating from a calm place. I want to be green. I want to be in the green.
All right, so step 1 is you got to monitor your own feelings. You've got to not be activated. Because I always say, you know, when I was a kid, neither one of my parents had any of the meta moment training. And I was, you know, I had difficulty, as everybody knows, because you've read my book. And I would yell and scream, and they'd say, get to your room, you know, or my mother would say, wait till your father gets home. And, you know, can't wait for daddy to get home because he's going to really take a meta moment. Not quite. And so first step is not to be activated, right? And to deactivate yourself.
Yeah. So someone's saying it's so hard not to be activated. That's very true. But it's not, you are going to get activated. It's what comes next. It's what you do about being activated. That's where we're trying to, we want to help you to address, right? So you're activated, take a deep breath, think about your best self.
Well, you know, and this reminds me of, like, remember our conception of emotion. We have conceived in our head that when you're angry, you have to be irrational and you know, out of control. There's no reason why you can't feel anger, frustration, anxiety, but you don't have to allow it to have so much power over your physiological system and so much power over your interaction. And so it's an interesting psychological, like, concept here, right? Which is that you can feel the emotion, but not allow that emotion to have the power over your reaction.
Yeah. And so what do you do, Mark, after you check in with yourself and your child is still screaming and yelling? So now you're in a calmer place. And then what do you do?
I think the next step is that you got to see where your child is at. Are they still having the conniption or the tantrum? And then you got to work with them to deactivate.
So what if you
Right.
think you know where your child's at?
So then I think the next step is to provide that unconditional love, unconditional support, and that kind of brief yet comforting check-in.
Yeah.
So let's do that little coaching, and let's try to find out what you're really feeling.
Yeah.
Because as we know, we as parents often mislabel feelings. We mislabel our kids' feelings. Our kids don't know their feelings. So I think the first is to listen to the story of what happened to try to get at the accurate feeling.
Yeah, and as you say in your book, and we talk about all the time, behavior doesn't equal feelings. So your child may be screaming and yelling and slamming their door, but that doesn't mean that they're angry just because you might do that when you're angry. And how do you get to know what your child is actually feeling? You've got to ask them. You've got to listen for the feelings.
And be that emotion scientist, as Amanda is saying.
Yeah.
And so those are the first few steps. And then obviously there's helping your child to find the strategy that works best for them,
Mm-hmm.
to not impose a strategy that you think will work best for you, for them, which I think is really hard because we want everyone to use the strategies that we like the most.
Yeah.
As opposed to help kids find the strategies that work best for them.
And we often underestimate our kids. We often think we have to tell them they're not going to know. But kids have great ideas. And you're all the experts on your kids. We're not the experts on your kids, right? So ask them, right? Remember that you can. I'm saying you're the expert on your kids, and that's true, but your kids are also the experts about what is going to work for them. So your kids like we don't know. We know emotion science, but then your kids will know what's going to work for them.
And I think, importantly, the piece that I think a lot of people forget is the follow-up.
Yeah.
Like when I was being horrifically bullied in school, it was like my mother was waiting for the day that I said everything is fine. But the next day, probably, something might have gone wrong, or the 2 days later, or the week later. And so that the mindset of everything is fine, I think, is problematic because it kind of says, I no longer have to kind of check in and be involved. What are your thoughts about that?
Are you asking me or?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
So I think it's really important. I also think that it saves your child worrying about what's going to happen next and whether or not there's going to be another opportunity to check in with you if you take the initiative as the parent to follow up. Because very often, even if you've come to some kind of solve or resolve after an interaction, you're still with that interaction the next day, especially if you were the one really upset, and you may still be ruminating about it. So your parent comes to you, what a relief. You get to talk about it again, or you get to feel that your parent is on your side again, or you reminded that your parent cares and can give you that same advice again, or listen to your advice.
So endless work around being an emotionally intelligent parent. Well, I'm going to jump into right now just to give you the history of the work that we do, because a lot of you are educators, is chapter 10, which is the work in education. And so just to give you some brief kind of history around this, back when I was in my early 20s, my uncle Marvin, who many of you know, retired as a teacher. And I was in therapy, and I was thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And I was reading self-help books, and I read about this work on emotion, and I was like, oh my goodness, this is the stuff that my uncle did with me as a kid, as you know from reading the book. And so I called my uncle, pulled him out of retirement. And back in the mid-1990s, we started working on this curriculum to help middle schoolers at the time unpack their feelings and manage them effectively. And it was very interesting because I just thought we could write a curriculum and like drop it off at the teacher and say, here's your book, here's your curriculum. And very, very quickly, we realized that that wasn't going to be the case, because many of the teachers would say things like, my job is not to talk to students about my feelings, or I don't want to talk about anxiety or despair. I only want to talk about joy and jolly. And I mean, the list goes on. And so then what we did is we said, all right, we got to work with teachers, and we got to develop the teachers. And that's about when I met you, Robin.
Yeah.
And we started really thinking about, okay, what do the adults need to be able to do so that they could both be the role models as teachers and educators, and then also implement at the classroom level.
Well, as I told you so many times, I never intended to be in education. I was a psychoanalyst in private practice, and it wasn't. I mean, I guess it was a combination of two things. One, that as an analyst, I got to see over and over again the evidence that the issues people struggle with start in childhood, and that no matter how much insight you have, if you don't have skills, you don't know what to do. So I may discover in exploring myself that you remind me of my brother, but unless I have the skills to do something different when I have that insight, we're not going to change our relationship, right? So my behavior is going to be key, and you need to be skillful at doing your behavior, otherwise the insight is not enough. And the other thing that happened was that my kids started school. And so when I would walk them to school, I would see teachers in front of the room saying things like, you should be ashamed of yourself, or sit down. And I would think, who's training people at the intersection of psychology and education? And that's when I went looking for you. Even though I didn't know that I would find you, I went looking for the people who were doing the work at the intersection of education and psychology. And of course, some teachers, like all of us, well, like just in the general population, are very skilled. And it's part of being a teacher with best practice to be able to tune into children and to have compassion. But it wasn't part of education. And as I said, skills are very important to learn and to teach.
And I think still to today, Ruler, as all of you know, is our center's approach to social and emotional learning. We're in about 3,000 schools now around the globe. And it's been slower to disseminate because of the intense amount of professional development that we know is necessary to help people do the work. So many schools adopt like a kit, an empathy kit or a self-regulation kit. And they expect that it's all of a sudden going to be kind of part of a child's development. And, as someone who, still at 51 years old and directs the Center for Emotional Intelligence and co-created the SEL model that we promote, I'm still trying to figure out oftentimes how to regulate my feelings. So the thought that there's a kit that does one lesson a week on Thursdays at 3 to teach these skills just seems, when you really think about it, it's like ridiculous. I don't know, would you all agree to that? Like the one lesson on Thursdays, on empathy or managing anger, like, boom, I got this managing anger thing, I'm done. You just breathe and, it drives me crazy. And so what we learned though, was that it's the kids, it's the teachers and other educators in the school. And then I remember doing presentations where the principal of the school would say something like, oh, we're so excited to have Mark and his team come do the presentation. And I really hope you all enjoy it. And then the principal would leave the room. And then what would happen is that teachers would come up to me on the break and say, you have no idea how difficult it is to work for this principal. He has no emotional intelligence. She has no skills. And they've already told us that, like, it's just performative while you're here. We're really not going to do this work until after the state tests in May. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And so we realized it was about leadership. And then, Robin, as you know, we had you hosted the event actually at Columbia University, where we met with superintendents from the city who were, Bonnie, one of our trainers now and colleagues at the center. And she came up and she's like, I want this in 57 sites across 5 boroughs. And we were like, oh my goodness, like, what do we do with that? And that was really, I think, our revelation that to do social and emotional learning well, to do this work in a way that would impact like a child's healthy development, a teacher's healthy development, it had to be part of the immune system. It had to be part of the DNA of the school. It had to be part of the system, as someone is saying. And so that's where we're at today.
And Bonnie was our champion. Bonnie came to every single meeting. Mark showed up, Bonnie was there. Bonnie was in the room cleaning up before Mark showed up. And Bonnie had the foresight and insight to begin parenting work at the same time that she was training teachers. And that was really completely novel in New York education, where they were bringing in an entire program system-wide and training all the parents and parent coordinators at the same time.
Exactly.
And Bonnie works with us right now. She retired from her job and she said, what do I want to do? I want to work with you guys.
That's right. She's my boss, actually. So there are 4 kind of what we call aims of ruler. And you know these tools because you've read the book. You've learned about the mood meter. You've learned about the meta moment. You learned about how to build a family charter and how to build a classroom charter. You've learned about the blueprint a little bit. We talked about that in the book. And the importance of teaching emotion language and the skills of ruler. And so we found over the years in our theory of change that it's got to have components for everybody: leaders, teachers, students, families. B, we have to focus on mindsets, getting everybody on the emotions matter bus. Like, if I were to ask you right now, if you're an educator or if you work in a traditional company, what percentage of your educators, are on the emotions matter bus? How many of you have educators that are like sitting in the front row of the bus, they want to drive the bus? Or how many of your educators are getting in front of the bus or just watching the bus drive by? The second is the skills of emotional intelligence, right? These are lifelong skills. They have to be embedded into the way you do faculty meetings every week, every month. Professional development is ongoing in this space. The third is culture and climate. Think about it. Is this part of the culture and climate? Is it in the faculty room? It is in the lunchroom? Is it in, my best example, I went to visit a school. It's one of my favorite stories in Seattle. And I walk into the school and there's a nice young woman there. And she says to me, who are you here to see? I said, oh, I'm here to see your principal. And she goes, oh, well, everyone who comes to the school comes in through me. She was an attendance person. And she goes, well, nobody comes into the school until they tell us how they're feeling. And she goes, we call this the mood meter. And she goes, have you ever seen the mood meter? I'm like, no, not really. I just wanted to pretend. And she goes, well, the yellow is this. And so how are you feeling today? I'm like, I'm yellow. And then she goes, that's wonderful, and blah, 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 blah. And so then I said, can you tell me more about how you use this tool as the attendance person? She's like, well, every kid who comes in late, right? A lot of times they're flustered. A lot of times they're having fights with their parents and they're angry about something. And I check in with them. I find out what quadrant they're in. I help them find the word that best describes their feeling. And then we go to the strategy wall and I help them find a strategy that they can use to help manage their feeling. So while they're walking to the class, they can, be in the best place for learning. And I was like, she's like, what do you think? I'm like, I'm thinking to myself, I think I'd love you. This is like incredible. Like, that's what this work is about. How far away is that from like the school buying a kit that the counselor does for 1 hour every week while the teacher disappears? It's completely a different way of thinking, right? About social and emotional learning and development. And then the final piece has to do with policies. So when there's bullying in your school, what happens? When there is a child who might need to be suspended, how is that infused or aligned with ruler in the principles of emotional intelligence? When you hire new teachers, how much do you check in and make sure that they are interested and motivated to teach this work? So you can see it's comprehensive, which is, what we think is important.
And just to
Well,
go back,
Robin,
Mark,
please.
just to go back from the beginning of the session where you were talking about like bringing it all together one way. When I think about schools, I think about some of the wonderful people who part of the Summer Principals Academy now have opened their own schools, like Dawn DaCosta, working in Thurgood Marshall, or any of our other wonderful school leaders. And I see myself walking into the school. And one of the things that is so impressive about schools that have really integrated the ruler approach system wide is that people are their best selves as they walk through the hallways, that people are intentional and mindful of the impact they're having on other people. And in their interactions, in their activities, even when they're alone, they are putting themselves into it as their best selves. It's not perfect. We're not shooting for perfection. It's not even possible. Excellence is good enough. And compassion for yourself, grace for yourself when you make a mistake. But that's what I think of when I think of an emotionally intelligent climate, when a climate that feels like a ruler school, a climate that feels like a place where students are ready to learn. And the students are their best selves too. The students are proud to tell us who their best self is. They're proud to dress like their best selves or be those superheroes to be their best selves. It's wonderful.
So if you're an educator and you don't know a lot about Ruler, I'm going to type in our website. You can learn more about it. And just try to get your principals, superintendents to get on that Emotions Matter bus. And so essentially right now, Ruler is from preschool all the way to high school, comprehensive training for every grade level, curriculum to adult development and support. And so, you know, I have called all of you who come to the book club my emotion revolutionaries. So you don't know that, but that's what I call you when people ask. I'm like, these are my emotion revolutionaries. They're running around the world trying to get people to talk about their feelings and preaching why the science of emotion matters. How many of you like that? At least looks like you like that. Cool.
I love hearing it. I think it's great. Yeah.
So since this is our last time together, we're going to just end, you know, in chapter 11, the focus is on the workplace. And, you know, for me, you know, it's very interesting. And Robin and I founded or co-founded a company called OG Life Lab. I'll just put the website in that you can check out. Because both of us were running around doing presentations and for companies, not for schools. And they'd say things like, well, what's the next step? What's the next step? And so with a good friend of ours, we decided to open up an organization that would provide adult learning for people who are adults, but in the workplace. And it's been around for about 2 years now and got big clients from Google to Johnson & Johnson to others. And really helping people in the quote unquote real workplace world learn the skills because they're going to be the leaders, right? And the bosses of many of our kids. And so
what's really cool about OG, I'll just say a little bit and then give it back to you, is that the process that you go through when you enter the OG Life Lab is one where you have personal coaching, where you have group presentations, where you say videos of Mark and of myself, and we both want to redo our videos, but that's okay. They're pretty good anyway. That's just for vanity. And you hear the voices of people on the street tell us what, and we'll tell you what their thoughts are about some of the different concepts. So there's education, personal reflection time, the opportunity to share in a group. Continue more.
Yeah, I wanted to say if anybody's interested in trying it out, Rob and I can get you like the first few modules for free. So just send an email to mark@marcbrackett.com and we'll get you connected to OG. So what's the case? You know, oftentimes I get pushback, you know, especially with these big Fortune 100 companies where I've presented and they say things like, well, you know, look at me. I've got the big corner office. Like, I don't need these skills. And I always think to myself, but like, everybody who works for you hates you. Do you realize how much more productivity you would have if you were more emotionally intelligent? And so I share this with you because we have done research at the center examining, like, does emotional intelligence matter? Does it matter for an organization? Does it matter for a company? I mean, how many of you have ever worked for someone who is emotionally unintelligent? And how many of you, when you think about that person, say to yourself something like, gosh, I would just like to work for that person for the rest of my life? It's like, no. I remember when I worked at Bellevue Hospital early in my career I won't mention the name of the clinic because the person I worked for was quite well known. This woman was so freaking mean to me. She would say things like, the best thing you did today was get me my tuna fish sandwich. And I'd have stomach aches in the morning. I mean, I would like be sick to my stomach. And it was just awful. And so I say this because we've done research. And the question is there a difference in the way people feel and behave at work when they report to someone who is higher in emotional intelligence? And we've now done this in like organizations, and we've done it in schools. And what is the answer? Yeah, everybody's going like, absolutely.
Of course.
What we know from our research is the following. About 40% more inspiration when you work with someone who's higher in emotional intelligence. About 40% less frustration. Greater job satisfaction, less burnout, more inspiration, more creativity, more ethical behavior, and more productivity. Less intentions to leave the profession. So the list just goes on and on. So when people say, well, I don't know if I want to invest in emotional intelligence training, I just say, you don't know what you're missing, because you may be successful, but think about how much more successful you could be if everyone were emotionally intelligent. Oh, we've got a lot of work to do, Robin.
A lot of work. Well, we always say it's the work of a lifetime, right?
So I'm just curious as we wrap up, because we're going to wrap up in about a minute or two for this year. By the way, we'll do another book club after the new year, and I'll share with you a few things. You know, what's coming? What's on your mind, Robin, around like what's it going to take to get the emotion revolution to be a reality?
Well, I think unfortunately, sometimes it takes a moment in time like we're having in our country right now, where there people can't help but long for the skills to help them manage their emotions. And the other thing it's going to take, somebody just gave me the answer, revolutionaries like everybody taking this, being part of this book club, like people spreading the word, talking about it, people being the change, people being their best self, using their skills in their interactions, in the everyday of it. And one of the things that's happened since we don't have a physical workplace is you realize it's all about the people, right? It's all about the way we treat ourselves, the way we treat other people. And as we said, I think it was earlier today, that while self-care often has a bad reputation because it seems like it's selfish to take care of ourselves, so necessary in order for us to be there for other people. And being with other people is what we do every day, the everyday of it at work and in school and at home. And it's everything. It's where we get our nourishment. It's where we get our inspiration from others. We are social creatures. So that's just the beginning.
Thank you. So a few things that you should all know. One is that Robin and I are working with a new nonprofit to release the Mood Meter 2.0. And we're beyond excited about this Mood Meter app that will be released in the spring. It's going to blow your mind with options and strategies. And we're just super, 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 super excited about it because it's going to have a lot of really cool features. On Pinterest, you can check out starting next Friday. I have a blog coming out on Pinterest, if you use Pinterest, called The Emotion Scientist. My first guest is going to be Kenneth Cole, the designer, and we're going to talk about mental health and his emotion regulation strategies. And just lots of other things that we're going to be releasing in the spring to just support everyone's health and wellness. And so I want to wrap up our book club by reading the last 3 paragraphs of the book, because we started with a little passage, and I'll read the last little bit, and then we'll just say goodbye for now. When I share stories about my childhood, people often say, "But you made it somehow, even with all the pain. If it weren't for your pain, you might not be doing what you're doing today." It's possible, I reply, maybe even probable. But I was fortunate, I say. And then I ask a few questions. How many kids will have parents who recognize their inability to help their child and seek therapy for him? How many will have an Uncle Marvin who happens to be a pioneer in thinking about the importance of emotional intelligence that can provide unconditional love and support? How many will get involved in the martial arts? How many will dedicate their lives to emotion science? My hunch is not many. So if we just hope for the best, many children will fall by the wayside. Emotion skills are the key to unlocking the potential inside each of us. And in that process of developing these skills, we each, heart by heart, mind by mind, create a culture in society unlike anything we've experienced thus far, and very much like the one we might dare to imagine. It's not easy to change a whole society, but we have to try. Our future and our children's future depends on it.
I always want to cry. I mean, it brings me to tears every time.
And so this is life's work. We know it's life's work. And so I just want to thank all of you for showing up on a Thursday evening to be part of this community, to be the future emotion revolutionaries and emotion scientists of our country and the world. And thank you, Robin, for being my partner and colleague in all this hard work. Thank you, Ryan, for supporting us behind the scenes. Deeply appreciate you. And for everyone else, be well. And until the next time, have a wonderful, wonderful holiday season, although I know it's going to be challenging. Be a preventionist, and I'm sure you'll find ways to use these skills to just have the best possible holiday season that you can have. On that note, bye, Robin.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, guys.